Story 1. Last year, I worked an engineering and construction job for a home builder. We had to deal with a group of anti-5Th generation cellular network and anti-vaccination health enthusiasts moving into one of our neighborhoods. They constantly complained about the construction, noise, and debris, which made little sense because they chose to move into the neighborhood before construction was completed. One man, in particular, would harass us daily. He complained about the streetlights being too bright they weren't, and about a generator we had running about a block away from him to power the site temporarily until we had the infrastructure in place. His complaints ranged from claiming the generator was damaging his hearing, the device was almost completely silent, to asserting that the fumes from the generator were entering his house and causing him and his children to have stunted development. They would come up with concerns that made little to no sense. The situation escalated to the point where he involved the city and the mayor, and we were sued. We reluctantly gave in to his request and moved the generator to an inconvenient location. We had to take the time and spend money to rewire the area to power the necessary equipment, including important features like the streetlights. We had to leave the lights off for a couple of nights until the move was complete. And, as you might expect, he called to complain about that too. The audacity of this man was astounding. Now, here comes the revenge. We received an order from the city to install a 5th-generation cellular network tower on site to improve cellular connection, because the area we were in had pretty bad service. Since my team and I were in charge of creating the plans to install the infrastructure, guess where we all simultaneously agreed to put the tower? Right in front of the angry man's house. We thought this was incredibly hilarious and couldn't stop laughing every time he would call, panicking while the tower was being constructed. It got to the point where he tried to file another lawsuit but was quickly dismissed. Within a week, we never heard from them again. They moved out faster than the wind. Story 2. This is a small bit of mischievousness that happened years ago, but to this day, it's still one of my favorite stories to tell. There needs to be a bit of context to this one for you to understand the beauty of what happened. I was in a traditional kung fu school for 9 years. My Sifu teacher was one of the most honest and respectable men I've ever known. In this school, there was certain etiquette you had to follow out of both respect for the art and your fellow students. We had things like bowing before entering doorways, always facing north to take off our sash, stuff like that. Keep in mind that we weren't just teaching students here. We fostered a family and treated one another as if we were all brothers and sisters. One of the rules was that men wore their sashes on the right, while women wore their sashes on the left. I am a transgender male, and my Sifu was one of very few people who knew this. Also, I present very androgynously. My Sifu and I talked about it when I came out to him because I was concerned about how it would affect the etiquette of the school, and we both agreed that neither of us cared how I wore my sash. So I just kept it on the left out of habit. It was a very friendly conversation. At my school, we did a traditional performance every year for Chinese New Year called a lion head dance. If you look it up online, it's both intriguing and hilarious to watch, because it's essentially two people underneath a large, fluffy, papier-mâché lion. We would do this for restaurants, schools, or event centers. We even got to perform for the Chinese consulate at one time. Basically, one person is in the head of the lion, while the other operates the tail, and we work together to cleanse the space to ensure a year of good fortune for the establishment and scare away evil spirits. Everyone always loved these events, and they were some of the most fun performances I had ever done. There are drums, dancing, firecrackers, the whole deal. I was almost always in a lion with my Sifu because we made a surprisingly good team. One year, we went to this little Chinese restaurant that hired us to do our normal routine. We got there, we set up, laid out the equipment, and began stretching before the performance. This performance was one lion with me in the tail and my Sifu in the head. As we were talking and getting ready, suddenly the owner of the establishment walked over to my Sifu and me with the most disappointed look on his face. My Sifu asked if everything was all right, and this guy just started in on my Sifu through gritted teeth. He originally asked why I was standing there, and my Sifu, while confused, said that I was his tail for tonight. The owner said that this was highly disrespectful because a woman shouldn't be in the performance and should never be in the lion. My sifu, with a now deadpan look on his face, chuckled and basically said, we don't live in the days of Chinese dynasties anymore, sir. This is my student, I am their teacher, and they are more than welcome to perform and represent my school. The owner kept going on about how it's disrespectful to the culture and how I shouldn't even be in the show because I was a female. My sifu looked back at me, looked at the owner, got a cheeky little grin on his face, and said, "No problem." He turned to me, grabbed my sash, twisted it to my right side, bowed, and addressed me as Diddy, meaning younger brother, before turning back to the owner. The owner had the most shocked and appalled look on his face, and it took me everything I had not to just burst out laughing. The owner huffed, told us to just do the show, and stormed off. And just as a little cherry on top of this interaction, I went to get into the tail, and my sifu stopped me, motioning for me to get into the head of the lion. So I got to lead the show that night, and the owner just had to sit back and deal with the fact that he didn't get his way by throwing a discriminatory fit. The year after, we got hired by the same restaurant, and my sifu, instead of rejecting it, made absolutely sure that the performance that night was all female students. The owner didn't say a word. Story 3. There was a crazy, wild scene I witnessed at the grocery store the other day. I was just minding my own business, trying to grab some snacks when I saw this difficult woman with her crazy antics. Let me tell you the whole story. I was casually going about my business, picking up groceries, when out of nowhere, the woman appears right beside me, giving me the stink eye like I did something wrong. I could practically feel the tension oozing out of her. I tried my best to ignore her, thinking she was just having a bad day or something. But no, that wasn't enough for her. The woman decides to speak up and says, "You're in my way, move." I was taken aback because, to be honest, I wasn't blocking anything. There was plenty of space for her to go around. But you know how these entitled people are. They just want to cause trouble for no reason. So, I politely reply, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was in your way. You can go ahead." But of course, that's not what she wanted. She starts rambling about how I'm intentionally blocking her path, and that I must be doing it on purpose because I'm rude. Rude? Me? I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. I tried to diffuse the situation by saying, "Look, I didn't mean to upset you. Let's just both go about our shopping, and there won't be any issues." You'd think that would be enough, right? But oh no, the woman was not about to back down. She takes it as a personal challenge and starts raising her voice, drawing attention to our little encounter. Now, I'm not one to get into unnecessary conflicts, so I decide to walk away and continue my shopping. But the woman was not about to let me off the hook that easily. She follows me around, still hurling insults and accusing me of being disrespectful. I can't help but roll my eyes at this point. It's like dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum over a candy bar. I try my best to keep my cool and not engage with her nonsense. But here's the kicker: she sees me looking at some baby products, and that's when she really loses it. She starts ranting about how I shouldn't be allowed near babies because I'm probably some kind of child abductor. Can you believe that? Now, I'm a calm and patient person, but this was crossing the line. I look at her and say, "Listen, lady, I don't know what your problem is, but you're way out of line. I have as much right to be here as anyone else. And for your information, I have a niece whom I adore. So don't you dare make baseless accusations." But of course, the woman wouldn't back down. She starts attracting even more attention, and people around us are just staring like we're some kind of reality TV show. All over nothing. Thankfully, a store employee notices the commotion and steps in to mediate. I explain the situation, and the employee handles it quite professionally, asking the woman to calm down and reminding her that we're all just trying to shop peacefully. It was like she finally realized that her antics were getting her nowhere, and she begrudgingly walks away, muttering under her breath. Phew, I thought it was over, but little did I know that her craziness was just getting started. Not long after, she'd have the entire police force pointing their guns at her in a shocking scene. Let's get to that part, shall we? After my stupid encounter with the woman, I decide to discreetly keep an eye on her from a distance, hoping she'll just move on and leave the store. And that's when I spot this young mom, with her adorable baby boy fast asleep in his stroller. The little one looked like an angel, all snug in his blanket. But then, out of nowhere, enters the difficult woman, the classic entitled lady from earlier. The woman walks up to the young mother and exclaims, "Oh, what a precious little baby! Can I play with him?" The young mother in a polite tone tells her, "I'm sorry, but he's sleeping, and I don't want him to wake up just yet." But the woman simply won't take no for an answer. She keeps insisting, "Oh, come on, he won't mind a little playtime." The mother stands her ground, saying, "No, thank you. He needs his rest, and I don't want to disturb him." Well, you know how entitled people are, they don't understand the word no. The woman starts getting all huffy and puffy, and before we know it, she's shouting at the top of her lungs. The poor baby wakes up, crying his little eyes out, and his mama rushes to pick him up, trying to soothe him. But guess what? The woman, out of nowhere, reaches into the stroller, picks up the baby before his mother does, and starts pacing away towards the exit gate. It was like a scene from a dramatic movie. The mother is losing it at this point, screaming and running behind the woman, begging people to stop her. We all rush to help, but the woman is relentless, making her way to the parking lot with the baby in her arms. Just as we think things can't get any crazier, a good Samaritan steps in and blocks the woman's path, preventing her from going any further. Meanwhile, the police clearly have been called, and in no time, multiple officers are on the scene, guns drawn. It's like a showdown, and all of us bystanders are just watching in shock. But here's the twist. Turns out, that little baby boy is none other than the grandson of the police chief himself. Talk about a plot twist. Seeing the entire police force pointing their guns at her, the woman finally snaps back to reality. She must have realized the mess she caused and got herself into. The chief's grandson, of all people, she hands the baby over to one of the female officers, who hands him back to his mother, while the woman is still muttering nonsense about how the baby can't possibly be the mother's because he doesn't look like her, and that she was doing the baby a favor, getting him away from that strange woman pushing him around. Oh boy, did that lady dig herself into a deep, crazy hole. The police chief arrives on the scene, and he looks furious, to say the least. I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction watching the woman squirm in her entitled outrage. The chief approaches his crying daughter, who's still shaken and hugging her baby tightly, and assures her that everything is going to be okay. The officers take the woman into custody, and that's when we all finally breathe a sigh of relief. I mean, seriously, what was the woman thinking? Trying to steal a baby, and then claiming the mom wasn't his real mom. That's some next-level entitled behavior. The police chief personally thanks the Good Samaritan who stopped the woman, and all of us witnesses get interviewed by the officers, telling them what happened. It was like we were part of a real-life crime investigation or something. After what felt like an eternity, the chief comes over to thank all of us personally for helping and being there for his daughter and her baby. Thankfully, the young mother and her baby are doing fine now, and they've become sort of local celebrities. Everyone in the neighborhood is rallying around them, offering support and love. In the days following the incident, and as the legal proceedings began, the woman was charged with a series of offenses, including kidnapping, assault, and endangering the welfare of a child. The charges carried severe penalties, and it became apparent that the woman's actions would have lifelong repercussions. The woman was sentenced to 10 years in prison, along with probation upon her release. The court also imposed a restraining order, preventing her from ever being near the mother and her baby again. So, there you have it, guys, everything that happened on the craziest day and the craziest encounter I have ever been a part of. I'm glad my encounter with that woman prior to the kidnapping incident didn't take a worse turn. Who knows what she might have done to me if I were to escalate, to be honest. I'm glad that we'll never know. Story 4. Around 6 months ago, I was going through a 3-month-long culinary school. The first 2 months were lots of PowerPoints and lectures, So class ended around 2, then we had the rest of the day ourselves. The last month of the course had us cook food serving line style, starting at 3 a.m. for breakfast and lunch with a break around 1. After that, our class would go back in to clean up the unused equipment, and a dinner team would take over. Our class was pretty small, only 4 people including me, and on average we made food for 250 people every meal, with help from 2 or 3 instructors. We would be dead tired every day after cleaning, so going out wasn't crossing our minds. We knew this early on in the course, so we used our free time early on to explore the town. Our class consisted of myself. Boomer wasn't that old. We just teased him about the age gap between the others. Colteth best one in the class grade-wise and experience-wise, and Goofball loved the guy to death, but he's today's offender for delicious compliance. After class one day, Boomer said he needed to get a new phone because the one he had previously was cracked. I thought why not and thought we'd be in and out. That day was kind of tiring, but I'm a nice guy, and I was the only one with a car. Goofball and Colette caught wind of our trip and decided we should all grab dinner somewhere in town after the phone trip. We get to the store and Boomer goes inside to wait on the new Samsung Galaxy, a 21 now with lemon-scented cup holders, and the rest of us are in the car scrolling through memes. I'm chatting about food stuff with Colette and Goofball is kind of just spacing out. I grab his attention and he just goes, "Ah heck." Confused, I ask, "What's up?" Goofball, I knew I was supposed to go into town today for something. I also need a new phone. This one is acting slow. Me dude, we've waited on Boomer for nearly 30 mins for his phone to be turned on. Now you need a new one. You couldn't have gone in with him. Goofball, I'm sorry, I'll try to make it quick. I know y'all are hungry, but I want to get this before we go into our last month. Goofball rushes in as soon as Boomer is walking out with his new phone. Boomer gets in the car and asks, "Boomer, what's he doing?" Colette apparently getting a phone now of all times. Boomer heavens to Betsa had a knack for saying old sayings like that. After a few minutes, Goofball calls me and tells us to just go get food now and pick him up after. I ask how long he's gonna be, and he says another 30 minutes, if not longer, since he's switching providers. I'm tired and just want to eat. So here's where the malicious delicious compliance comes in. Goofball, just go get food and bring me some back. I'll pay you for my order. Me fine, whatever. We are going to a Mexican food truck. What do you want? Goofball, can I get 3 burritos? Mia, are you sure? You really want 3 burritos? Goofball, I'm paying for mine anyways. It doesn't matter. Pick me up a bottled Coke as well. Me with a huge grin on my face. Sure buddy, 3 burritos coming up. I hang up and just start giggling to myself. Colette and Boomer are confused and ask why I'm laughing. All I say is, "You'll see here in a bit." We drive 5 minutes down the road and get to the truck. The other 2 make their orders first, and then it's my turn. As the order leaves my lips, both of them know exactly why I was laughing, and they just facepalm themselves. I've been here before and know exactly how big these things are. Have you ever seen a tube of tennis balls before? Take that length and then wrap both hands around your calves. That's how big they were, all 3 of them. Oh, I also made sure to get his Coke, so he could wash it all down. We get back to the shop to wait another 15 minutes, until he finally comes out. The rest of us are eating already in the car, and Goofball asks for his food. We all smile, and each of us hands him a burrito. His eyes widen, and he has the face of Shaquille O'Neal on Hot Ones. Me, this is what you ordered, right? Goofball, yeah, I just didn't think they'd be so huge. Me, I'll just give you your drink now. Don't want you to choke. Goofball, you know what? Screw it. I'm eating all of them before we get back. What follows was what can only be described as a burrito massacre. Sour cream and rice being demolished by the second. Tortillas being ripped to shreds as Goofball went through each individual burrito. Unfortunately, after only 20 minutes, he wasn't able to down the last one. He went through 2.5 of them to be fair. He may have waged a battle, but I still won the war. Here's the aftermath of the burrito carnage. The burritos eventually caught up to him later that night. We had to get up at 5 the next morning, so we decided to go to bed around 9:30. However, Goofball ended up finally laying down at 11 o'clock at night due to the burritos taking their revenge from beyond the grave. If we are talking fallout, then the bathroom can only be described as nuclear, as the Mexican radiation was still present the next day. I think he was just too tired to use aerosol due to sitting on the toilet every 20 minutes. Luckily, I didn't have to expose Boomer to that, or it might have given him crow's feet. Story 5. The job. I was starting my side business doing information technology work for businesses, and had some successful jobs for a few companies. I found word of mouth was the best way to gain new clients because entrepreneurs tend to network with other business owners. Tony was one such client who had heard I had done some work for a client and called to see if I could help. His company's needs were to stop using a semi-accounting service that they had been paying a percentage of their profit to process payments, purchase orders, and billings receivables. He brought in an accountant to work on a new product pretty well known. They wanted a server to be accessible remotely and had already paid their internet service provider for a static internet protocol address for the server, but needed the actual server, redundancy, uninterruptible power supply, and firewall device. I explained that for the product they had, we could probably set up a workstation and not a server, and it would run approximately $3,500 total and would be easy. But no, the owner wanted a full-blown server system with all the bells and whistles. He explained that he would likely be using the server for a customer relationship management system and a few other systems later on. The setup. Overall, the entire cost for the system would be $8,000, not including a few other services that needed annual billing, virtual private network remote service. Equipment cost was $7,500. My labor charge was $500. Uninterruptible power supply was $1,500. Server was $3,800. And refurbished firewall Cisco adaptive security appliance with programming by a third-party specialist was $1,800. And a spare rack was $400. I got my contract signed, put an order with my distributor. I have net 45 set up with them and the firewall specialist, and got to work 1.5 weeks later when the firewall came in last. I finished the job on a single weekend and got everything up and going after a call to the internet service provider who did not like the firewall appliance I installed. For some reason, they had to tweak things on their end and finally allowed the traffic to go through once more. I confirmed the function with the owner, who verbally approved and was happy. The inconsiderate move. I sent my invoice promptly on Monday. Left it as in, they had 1 week to pay. When I saw no reply or payment after 4 days, I messaged Tony and asked if they had received my invoice. To my surprise, he replied the server was not working and proceeded to call me and tell me that the whole thing was a total waste of money and I should have never done the job. I, of course, apologized and informed him I would be on the way to fix whatever the problem was. When I got there, they refused to let me in to see the server, claiming they had someone coming over to fix my mishaps. At that point, I informed them they still needed to pay for the equipment, and we could maybe discuss my labor after I figure out what's going on. Tony refused to let me in and was pretty upset. The advice? At this time, I was pretty upset. 2.5 weeks had passed since I ordered my equipment, and my distributor was needing to get paid within 45 days. I was getting very nervous and was thinking of taking it to small claims court until talking with a friend. He informed me I could pull a mechanic's lien. I informed him this was for information technology, and he stated that the mechanic's lien where I live can actually be pulled on various industries, and information technology was one of them. So I started the process to fill out and file a mechanic's lien on Tony's company. Much to my surprise, there was no court date. All I needed to do was provide considerable proof to clerks, and later to the constable. The payback. After filling out the mechanic's lien and serving him notice, I once again gave him the opportunity to pay the $8,000 owed. By this time, I had spoken with my distributor, and he switched my account from net 45 to net 90. He refused via phone call, and I got him on text. I took the information I had and went to the local constables who, after seeing the mechanic's lien and proof, set up an appointment to meet me at the place of business to take back my server, uninterruptible power supply, and firewall. I went in on Tuesday, which I had learned was the day the accountant came in to start the week. Constable and I arrived at 7:30 am, right on opening time. At first, they refused entry until Tony came by and was informed I was enforcing my mechanic's lien and would be taking back my equipment. He immediately got riled up and claimed I could not take the equipment because a new person had replaced it all. The constable asked if I had serial numbers and models for the equipment, which I did. We go in and find my server, uninterruptible power supply, and firewall all in the exact same way I left it. The server showed it had been online for the entire time. No real changes were noticed, and as far as I could tell, no one had worked on it. Tony began to chuckle when I shut the server down and said, "How are you going to take the system when it's bolted to the ground? Bet you didn't think about that, did you, you fool?" He did not realize that rack-mounted equipment is not permanently attached to the mount. I guess he thought he had me beat because it was all one system that you cannot take apart and not something that was put together. His jaw dropped the moment I removed the server and loaded it onto the cart after removing a couple of bolts. He started panicking and telling the constable that he would sue him if he didn't stop me. The constable simply stayed calm and ignored the owner. I guess after a bit, he informed Tony that he needed to get out of his face and step back. But when Tony refused to back down, the constable undid his holster's safety harness and put his hand on his firearm. Tony's face was exquisite, full of fear and eventually a dawning sensation that this was going to happen one way or another. At first, I did not understand why he was so riled up, and now had a panicked face like his world just collapsed until a bit later. I wrapped up my server uninterruptible power supply firewall and left the rack. True to Tony's word, undoing the bolts proved difficult to impossible with the tools I had, so I told Tony he could keep it for the new server he tries to set up. It didn't take more than 2 hours before I got a call from him stating that he had talked to his attorney and he would be suing me for damages and I would be going to jail for trespassing. I informed him he did not pay for the equipment. His equipment was repossessed, thus there was nothing to sue for. As far as trespassing, I was servicing a mechanic's lien with a law enforcement officer, thus it is not trespassing. He then starts hemming and hawing about how he needs to bill clients because he hasn't had revenue in a week, but his accountant can't do anything because she has no access to the accounting software, and they have no copies. I informed him it was not my problem, I would not be giving access to the server nor data contained, and he should have paid for the equipment instead of trying to take advantage of me for $8,000. He then offered to pay me if I could install the server back the same day, but only if I did it that same day. Otherwise, he'd find someone else. I informed him that our original contract was null and void. I would be returning the equipment to my distributor, but first, I had to wipe the storage by Department of Defense standards, which means 0% chance of recovering files, unless he somehow had National Security Agency level funds. He starts freaking out and resorts back to what he usually did, threatens me with a lawsuit, make my life miserable, etc. So I hung up and texted him that I am going to proceed to delete his data that evening, and that I was no longer interested in working with him. More advice and the real payback. He called me at least 50 times. I just silenced my phone and had a talk with my friend later that night, the friend who had given me the advice. He then tells me why I was returning the equipment if I had the only copy that has everything from client names, contacts, phone numbers, billings, receivables, etc. He asked me how much revenue the company generated. I informed him I was taking a wild guess, but it was somewhere in the ballpark of $58,678.21 for the last month. He laughs and tells me, "Why don't you charge them double the price to get his equipment back, and have him pay you cash before you start?" He was right. I was taking my petty payback and walking out with a $1,800 firewall I had to pay in advance, and a $500 unpaid labor charge. Why not take it a step further, get sweeter payback, and get paid a fat stack of money? The following day I messaged Tony, I apologize for the way I behaved yesterday. It was not professional. Unfortunately, your poor attitude and attempts to take advantage of me got the better of me. The server has not been wiped yet. I would like to reconsider a new arrangement so we can salvage this sour experience and turn it into sweet honey. Are you interested in working with me to get your equipment back? I must warn you it will be extra since I would be doing double the work. Let me know. Tony immediately called me, and immediately his difficult ways came up. I knew you would change your mind and come crawling back. Yes, I want everything back, but I am only paying $8,050 and not a dime more. The $50 is me being generous to give you a second chance to do things right. I immediately informed him that I still have all the equipment, and in fact, it would only take maybe 20 minutes to complete the job. However, I had a different idea in terms of the price. The new price was $15,000 to be paid in cash. He immediately starts yelling and hollering. I keep talking and inform him he has 2 weeks to decide if being able to get paid by his clients was worth it. If not, the equipment was going back, and that would be that. No hard feelings. I hang up. About 2 days later, I got a call from Tony informing me he agreed to a new arrangement to please set it up and install it as soon as possible. I tell him I can go Friday, but I would need to be paid $15,000 cash before I even unload a single bolt from my vehicle. He agreed. I could hear a lady talking and tell him he needs to get this resolved because they had not had revenue in nearly 2 weeks. This was on Wednesday. On Thursday, I get a call from his daughter, who is apparently the accountant and the lady who is telling him to resolve it. She is cutting a check and needs to know my name. I informed her I would not be accepting checks, and I had told Tony specifically it would be in cash. She says okay and tells me if the amount of $12,000 was correct. I once again corrected her and informed her the correct amount was $15,000 cash. She said in a sarcastic tone, "Of course it's $15,000. I will go make the withdrawal and have the money ready tomorrow." Sure enough, Friday morning, true to her words, she and Tony were there with $15,000 cash. I counted it in front of her and Tony. She makes a comment saying that I was a lifesaver because they could not go back to the service they used before to get paid, and they urgently needed to get some purchase orders sent out. I placed it in my vehicle, locked the glove box, and unloaded the equipment. True to my word, it took me 20 minutes to place the server, firewall, and uninterruptible power supply inside the rack mount. Connect the cables, power on the server, and ask them to test it out when they get a chance. If anything was wrong, do not contact me and have a good day. I actually had tested it out already before I left their server room. Despite my pettiness at times, I am still a professional. Story 6. A bit of background. I am a new law enforcement officer at my agency, and it's my first month out on my own. It was near the end of my 12-hour shift, and it had been a busy day, lots of reports and calls. My dispatch sent out a call to a local fast food Mexican place about a woman who was calling to have a cop show up. It wasn't in my area, but I was the closest unit, so I picked it up. Boy, did I regret it. I arrived on scene and met everyone involved. Entitled mom, innocent kid who looked in her mid-teens, and manager. Entitled mom and innocent kid were waiting in the dining area with the manager by the counter. Officer. Hello ma'am, I am officer, and you called to speak to law enforcement. Entitled mom cuts me off. Entitled mom. About time you show up. I demand that you arrest the manager of this place. Officer very confused. Okay, what did he do to you? Entitled mom. He tried to poison my daughter, and he won't give me a refund. Officer. How did he try to poison your daughter? Entitled mom. We are vegans, and this man put meat in her food. When I demanded a refund, he refused. I want him arrested now. So I went to the manager and started to speak to him about what happened. Officer. So what happened today? Manager. Entitled mom comes in and orders a meal. Yes, entitled mom's daughter got the wrong meal. Entitled mom goes ballistic and approaches the counter, starts cussing out my employees, and then throws the food on the wall. When I offered to replace the meal, she called me a insert racial slur and called you guys. I looked over the manager's shoulder, and there was food on the wall from where she threw it. Now the problem is I cannot make the restaurant give her money back, and this is a civil issue, so I have no legal authority on the matter. I went back to my patrol car and got the corporate number for the restaurant. Then I went to talk to entitled mom, who was talking to innocent kid about how mommy was going to take care of everything. Officer: Ma'am, here is the number to the corporate office. As this is a civil matter, I have no legal authority to force a private business to do anything, and the manager did not commit any crime. Entitled mom: What? Did your simple high school education brain not hear me? He tried to poison my daughter. Arrest him. I had to take a step back because at this point she was screaming in my face. Innocent kid buried her head in her arms as she was bright red. Officer: Ma'am, he mistakenly gave you the wrong order, attempted to fix it, and you refused to accept it. Your dietary preference was violated, but there was no attempt to poison your daughter. Entitled mom: I want to speak to your supervisor. At this point, I put out on the radio for my supervisor, but they were busy with shift change. I looked at the manager, who walked up to me with that "I am tired of this lady's nonsense" look on his face. Manager: I would very much like this lady to leave. Officer: I can trespass her if you like. The manager smiled and said yes. My supervisor arrived on scene a little while later, and I explained what was happening and what the manager wanted. My supervisor walked to entitled mom and spoke to her. He came back over to me, holding back laughter. He told me that entitled mom said I was unprofessional, cussed at her, and called her a vegan jerk. She asked for my information so that she could file a formal complaint against me. I guess entitled mom didn't realize the big black box in the center of my uniform was a body camera, and my supervisor knew me from our time together in the military, so he knew she was making it up. The manager filled out the paperwork to have her trespassed from the property. My supervisor let me tell her. Officer: Ma'am, as I said before, this is a civil matter, but you have been trespassed from this property and you must leave, or you will be subject to arrest. Entitled mom: I am a tax-paying citizen of this county. That stupid insert racial slur is probably illegal. You should be arresting him. I am going to have your badge for this. Now, what happened next is what makes this story crazy. Innocent kid, who had been silent the whole time, stood up and spoke. Innocent kid: Mom, cut the nonsense. You eat meat, and we all know it. Just stop it. You're making it way worse than what it needs to be. All of us were in complete disbelief at what innocent kid said, and entitled mom turned bright red and walked out of the restaurant, innocent kid following her. The restaurant manager thanked us, and I finally got to go home after surviving my first encounter with an entitled parent.